You know what time it is. We are back. Box to box football. We are back from, I don't know, it's been a long hiatus. A couple years, maybe 3, 4, 5. Who knows? COVID kind of no time dilation and all this stuff. But, just welcome back. I was super excited to be back. Obviously, Kyle Franco and Mike Samsel, who were both in the studio with us when we were back in the BCB days in that little back room, trying to dodge all the people coming in for all those other shows. But right now we got two new people, Stu and JJ. If you want to just introduce yourself, if you missed the little preview the other day.
Yeah, I'm Stu Kovacs over for CBS Sports Radio. Big Liverpool fan. Kind of new to the soccer game last 5 years, but the last 5 years I've really learned a lot and taken it all in. So I'm excited to be with you guys and talk some soccer.
And I'm JJ Duke. Been a footy fan pretty much since day one, back in the days of Fox Sports World when you used to get one game a week, which was the 7:30 a.m. kickoff on a Saturday. And boy, it seems like we're going to be getting there just in a couple of days' time. The Premier League is back. The EFL kicked off this past weekend, or whenever you're listening on any of the outlets that you get your podcast, which of course, by the way, make sure to drop a like, give us 5 stars. You know how the algorithm works. Tell your friends about it because we want to be getting to as many people as possible. But yes, Man U getting going on Monday and everybody else kicking off this weekend.
Except for the first game, City and Burnley, after the Arsenal fluked another win the other day, and I can't even believe the 11th minute of 8 minutes of stoppage time. This, at some point, we're going to talk about.
How dare you, Man United fan, complain about stoppage time?
I mean, look, 3 minutes added on to the 8 minutes. As soon as that ball went to the corner, I was like, because I had City. And I was just like, man, this is brutal. And I just watched it go in, and I'm like, Arsenal's going to win this. But yeah, now it's if you're watching a little bit, I mean, we'll get into the championship next week. But some of these games had 14 minutes of stoppage time in the second half, and there was an interesting stat today about some of the teams where the ball is out of play the most. Crystal Palace celebrated their goals because they don't score that many for like 86 seconds, which was the most out of any Premier League team. So it's very interesting. I think this new rule will be pretty interesting. But today we're going to talk about a little preview, and we're going to talk about the promoted teams and the bottom half teams from last year.
It's preview time. So just quick rundown on how we're going to do this. There's going to be 2 episodes here for the preview, just separating them off by, if you want to call it top half, bottom half. But we're going to start today, our first one, with the teams that finished 11th through 17th, and then the 3 promoted clubs that came up. So yes, that includes Chelsea today.
I'm here for this Chelsea slander all so much. And by the way, I already mentioned about the fact that, give us 5 stars, drop a like, give us some comments. Also, you can follow us on social media as well, on Twitter, X, and Instagram, wherever you want to follow us. That's at Box to Box FT Ball, Box to Box Football. Love to hear your guys' thoughts about that as we get rolling.
All right, so let's get started, gang, on our first team, Luton Town. They were the promotion playoff winners coming out of the championship. They do come into this season in the Premier League as the odds-on favorite to go back down. And we'll just get your thoughts on them. Obviously, they a great story on how they have risen from non-league back through the divisions, and then ultimately culminating in that victory in the playoff final. A lot has been made about Kenilworth Road, their stadium, and it not, and its size, and it needing a lot of renovations to get up to Premier League standards. Does Luton have any chance of staying in this division?
It doesn't feel like it, unfortunately. I think we've been spoiled over the past probably 5 years. It feels like every year kind of a big team has come back up. Aston Villa, Fulham, Newcastle, Nottingham spent crazy money when they came back up. This Luton Town team kind of feels like an old school promoted team, bringing in championship guys, Thomas Kaminsky, Ryan Giles to Heath Chung. This is an old school promotion team. Maybe this money will welcome them into the yo-yo team category, but that kind of feels like the ceiling, doesn't it, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, if Heath Chung is their biggest addition, this team has no chance. He stinks. I've watched him kind of just run into defenders for years, and everybody was kind of saying he might, make it through at United. I mean, there might not be a better story than this. What Luton Town's done in the last 9 years, going from 9. This is what Wrexham wants to do. If you follow Welcome to Wrexham, they were in non-league and went from League 2 to League 1 to the Championship, and won the final. But look, they can't even play their first home game. It already got postponed because it's not up to standard. It's not like when Bournemouth came up and the stadium was so small. I mean, that stadium was kind of nice. I mean, if you remember when Brighton came up, they had the Amex coming in. So I just don't see any way. I mean, you just look at the players they brought in. I don't see it. But the other thing too is, I think, and Kyle will speak this next time with Fulham. When you Fulham always tried to they were that yo-yo team. They always tried to, play cautious. Last year they threw everything to the wind and scored goals and went for it in attack. And early in the season they racked up, 40 points with these wins. You have to win games in the Premier League. You can't try to play for points or try to, it was an emotional loss, or you got to get points. You got to win games. I just don't see where they're going to get goals from.
Well, yeah, 3 points counts the same in the beginning of the season as it does at the end of the season. So, maybe you count on that promotion bounce, that first time in the new league and before, injuries and fatigue and the issues with depth really hit your squad. If you can bank some points early on for some goodwill, maybe that can carry you, towards the end of the season and give yourself a chance to stay up at the end. But I just think it's going to be very difficult for Luton. This almost feels like, remember when Derby County came up a while back and just had one of the worst seasons ever. And not that Luton is trying to replicate that, but it has it could have that kind of feel to it. I just think they're going to struggle to compete in this division.
Now, the one thing I will say in favor of Luton, JJ, is the fact that they do have some guys that could score. Elijah Adebayo, Carlton Morris, Collie Woodry a little bit. We'll see what he can do in the Premier League. But, I mean, they have guys that have scored all over the levels of England.
Yeah, they do. And I think the big one for me, if we're actually talking about goals, I think it's on the back end, truthfully, is how little can they concede, especially in the early part of the season. Can they have a defense that can shore it up? One of their big men in the back, Tom Lockyer, who is part of the Wales team in the World Cup, he was part of the EFL Championship team last year. He helped them to one of the best defensive records in the championship. Yes, it's a different level, but if you can keep yourself within few matches, as Kyle, you rightly said, points at the beginning of the season are just as equal as points at the end of the season. If you can bank together 20 points by New Year's, you have a chance. You might actually even be out of the relegation spots at that point. So it will be fascinating. Stu, I know you were trying to get in on something before we wrap this up.
Yeah, and kind of to your point, I mean, they do have Brighton and Chelsea early on the road, but then they have a stretch of West Ham at home, at Fulham, home against Wolves, at Everton to close out September. So if anything, in those 4 games, if they can somehow get, 7-8 points, I mean, that's a big ask for this team. That's going to be really tough. But if they can get some points early, that will go a long way for them because they're definitely going to need it.
Definitely. And hey, listen, I'm someone that loves a little bit of classic. I don't mind the fact that we have an old school stadium. We have these absolute behemoth structures that are coming up every other season. For me, let's have a little bit of elbow grease. Let's have some spots where you have to look around poles. It's fine. It's character. That's what we love. That's what we grew up on this game. But we are going to get just quick predictions from everybody about each team. It sounds like everybody has them pegged to finish last. Is this pretty fair to say?
Does anybody not?
I don't have them last. I have them 19th.
You have them 19th. Okay.
I have him last.
20th.
20th as well. But hey, all the best to the Hatters as they get their season going. And remember, as Sean rightly said, they do have their first home match postponed right now. Scheduled their first home match at Kenilworth Road is going to be on September 1st against West Ham as they continue to make the improvements. It's mostly on the TV side to get things going. So now we move to the second of the three promoted teams from the championship. And this team actually had a really good run, not only in the championship gaining automatic promotion, but also made the semifinals of the FA Cup. That would be Sheffield United. Now, we did experience them being kind of the flash in the pan. They nearly got European football in their first season in the Premier League a couple of seasons ago, dropped back down. But it seems like, yes, the changes were there. They lost, and Jai now reported 18 million to Marseille, but they've brought in some really nice players, and including, for the Americans out there, Aaron Trusty.
Shout out Austin Trusty.
Yeah, Austin Trusty, love to see it. So, guys, what are we thinking? Do we think Sheffield can replicate what they had in their first season in their previous go-around in the Prem?
I think they're more likely to replicate what Derby County did in 07-08 and be one of the worst teams in Premier League history.
That's a shout.
This team sold Njai, who was the only one who could score in the championship, on their roster. They're looking like they're going to sell Sanderberg to Burnley. That's according to Fabrizio, that's likely to happen in the next couple of days. They brought in guys from Sweden, Denmark, second tier of France, an American, which, I think this team is not only the worst team in the Premier League this year, maybe the worst Premier League team in the last 10 years.
I don't see it. I don't see that having any chance to stay up as well. I just, Ollie McBurney, Billy Sharp finally retired. He played in the championship for about 30 years. He was one of those championship guys, man. He could score goals in the championship, but if he ever went up to the Premier League, he just couldn't do it. But Ollie Norwood, Ollie McBurney, come on, man. Like, those guys, are they any better than they were 2 years ago when they were up, when they got relegated that year? I don't see it. They have.
They're worse?
Yeah, they're worse.
No Sanderberg.
The problem, like, once again, when you come up, when Fulham came up last year, they had Mitrovic, who was, obviously a big time goal scorer. They have a guy who was on fire for the first 6 months until he went crazy against Manchester United in the FA Cup.
They were going to win that game. They were going to win that game
100%.
too.
You guys did that. 100%. Yep. No, they had him beat. Yep. And then he did that. But up until that point, the guy couldn't. Every single game, he was one of these guys. When you look on, if you do like fantasy football, he was the guy. Hey, listen, I'm putting him in because he's a little bit lower value guy, and he always scored goals. I just don't know where, it's the same Luton Town or Sheffield United. I just don't see where the goals are coming from.
Well, I just say this before we take predictions on Sheffield United. Looking forward to see Austin Trusty at Sheffield United. He was a Union Academy product, came out of the Philadelphia Union Academy in MLS, and really took the long road to the Premier League. He kind of struggled to get into the Union first team, went somewhere else in MLS, went on to Arsenal, and they loaned him out, and he was Birmingham City's player of the season last year in the championship, and worked his way into the U.S. national team squad there. And now, look, he's going to get a baptism by fire here on this Sheffield United team, and we're going to get a chance to see what he's made of. But he's a guy who, if he has a good season, he could play his way into like the U.S. center back picture.
The one thing that I'm going to be very fascinated with this team, because the combination of the money that they made back on Njai and a couple other signings, and the money that they got from the FA Cup run last season. Remember, there were a couple of early games on television, got to the semifinals, so that does help the the wallet a little bit. Is, do they make a couple of moves at the deadline? We're recording on August 7th. They still have a few more weeks. If they realize all of a sudden 2 or 3 matches in that, they're going to need to go get a goal scorer, there's a possibility that we could see some deadline day drama from them.
And if they add, they have a shot. But as it is right now, this team is horrific.
Yeah, where the goal coming from, right?
Sheffield United, we got him. I got him 19th.
Yeah,
19th,
same.
about 19th, 20th. Yeah,
19th. Yeah.
Now we get the promoted team that I think a lot of people are going to think can stay up, and that's Vincent Kompany's Burnley, runaway winners in the championship last year. They're going to open against Manchester City, of course, because with the Kompany tie-in, going up against Pep and City, and they played some really good football last year in the championship. Different style, scored 87 goals last year, which led the league. 46 matches, so you do the math, that's almost 2 goals a game. Can Burnley continue to score at that rate enough in the Premier League while also being stingy enough in the back to stay in the division? They're probably the one, in my opinion, of the 3 promoted teams that's got the best chance to stay up.
Yeah, is there, are they better than, or are they as good as Everton right now and Nottingham Forest?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah, they're great. They're all, those teams are all in it. It's just going to come down to whether or not, same thing I said with if they can pick up 20 points or 25 points by January 1st and just put themselves in decent position. I mean, they're going to get absolutely smoked on Friday by City. City's going to be. I think the way they lost that game, City doesn't usually have those 2 games where they play poor, but I just think you look at some of their players they have some people that can score some goals. Plus they got some players. Obviously, James Trevor comes in from Manchester City. They lost Ashley Barnes. I think he's been there forever. But, Sander Burge coming in, I think, is going to be pretty big for them. But, yeah, I think they have a pretty decent shot. And, I think they have a decent shot to maybe finish, 12th, 13th, somewhere a little bit up the table.
Yeah, so Samsel gave his early shout. I'm going to give an early shout as well. This team by Christmas will be in the European places. Wow. Why I say that is this. The beautiful thing here in America is now we get a lot of championship matches, and I actually enjoy throwing on a number of championship matches on various streaming platforms, and this team plays to a standard of a top half level Premiership team by the way that they move. I mean, you obviously have Vincent Kompany, who's been there, done it all. You just look on the wall, he's got all of his accolades. But he has brought this different standard to Burnley from the last time that we saw them in the Premier League. And no disrespect to Sean Dyche, he did get them to Europe, actually. It's a different brand of football that they played, but this is going to be one that's much more compatible to what you're seeing in the modern day. And I feel like, goals might be tough to come by at times, but they have a defense that, I mean, they fell off at the end of the season and they were still miles ahead of everybody else. So if they can, similar to what I was saying with Luton, if they can post a couple of clean sheets early, Trafford is coming off of a great under 21 performance at the Euros. He's going to have confidence coming in. Do they sign 1 or 2 more players? I'm not sure what their budget is at the moment, but I see them getting out of the gate early, and I would not be surprised. I know, Sean, you said it might be a tough day at the office on Friday. I wouldn't be surprised if they get a point from that one just to set the table. Brentford did it a couple of years ago to Arsenal. Why can Burnley not do it against City?
Yeah, it's just a quick point, just to kind of go into that. We're talking about the bottom half of the table here today. And, the one thing I think that is different in the Premier League now than was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, Manchester City, Arsenal, United, Newcastle United, Liverpool, Brighton, Aston Villa, Tottenham finished 8th. I mean, Brentford had a good year. Chelsea finished 12th. You don't have every week. There, La Liga is, there's some easy games in there. This league has become so much tougher with Newcastle's money and, Brighton in Europe, the way they play and all this stuff. So it's just for these promoted teams when they come up, like you say, you got it. If you can nick some wins against the bottom half teams and maybe get a result against, an Aston Villa after they're in Europe on a Thursday, you have a good chance.
The only thing that scares me about this Burnley team, and the only thing I wonder about it with this Burnley team is Vincent Company their manager at the end of the year? Or JJ, if they go on this great run of form that you're predicting, and the guy who was coaching in Australia 18 months ago flames out at Spurs, or Chelsea does Chelsea things, or one of the jobs in France like a Monaco, a PSG, one of those come up, is Vincent Company going to stay with this team the whole year? If he does, I think they're pretty safe.
Yeah, it's a completely valid question. I mean, jobs in the Premier League go by every moon cycle, pretty much, right? Like, I mean, how many managers were fired before the first quarter of the season last year? I think there were already 2 or 3. It is crazy. So, yeah, I see where you're coming from. For Company, I think he values the long-term project. Do I think that long-term project is going to be more than 3 years? Not quite sure, but I think he is destined to see at least this season through.
Yeah, the two things that would concern me, I would say, is, and you guys kind of alluded to the first one, they won the league by so much last year that the second half of the season, they didn't really play a game that mattered. So they haven't played a game that mattered for so long now. So that's going to be an adjustment. And also their start, obviously we mentioned they start against City, and then they are home against Villa, home against Spurs, at Forest, home against United, at Newcastle, and then home against Chelsea. So those are the first 7 games. That's a pretty rough start.
Yeah, you don't want to go in a
hole. Yeah, that whole they could dig themselves a bit of a hole. But if they get out of that, I have high hopes for this team as well, especially after the Sanderberg signing. I knocked them up 1 or 2 spots after that today. I think that could be a game changer for them.
The only other thing that I think is worth mentioning is their leading scorer last year, Nathan Tella, is now back at Southampton. They weren't able to buy him. We'll see if they end up buying him by the end of the window.
Yeah, again, this is being recorded in early August. There is still a long way to go with business before we really get into it. But so I made my shout. Do you all have Burnley as the only promoted team that stays up?
I do.
I do. Yeah, I have them 13th.
I have them 12th.
I have them 12th as well.
I am buying Burnley coming in and staying up.
I would say probably 15th, something like that. I think they'll probably stay up 15th, 16th, somewhere 14th, something like that.
All right, so we now turn to all the returners from last year, and a team that a lot of people pegged to go down. They just survived by the skin of their teeth, and then some is our friends Everton. And I mean, this is deep sigh. This is a club that the fans don't deserve how bad it's been. Everton is arguably one of the best supported clubs in that country for a number of different reasons. They're not afraid to voice their disapproval. They're always going to be behind their team. They've wanted the board out for quite a long time. They've gone through however many managers in the last 2 seasons alone. They've currently got financial fair play issues and hearings coming up. They haven't signed, frankly, anybody that is going to be saying, yep, this is going to be the guy that's going to rescue them. They let go of Ellis Sims, who I personally thought that was a surprise that they brought him back from Sunderland because he didn't do anything from the club in the second half of the season. Yerry Mina's gone. Andros Townsend's gone. Connor Cody goes to Leicester. They lost an outstanding young player in Samuel Smith. For me, this is a team that I'd be surprised if they finish above 19th place.
Well, I'll just jump in here. They do get a full season of Sean Dyche, which is a manager who has escaped relegation before with Burnley. For many years, he did it with Burnley before it finally caught up to him. So I just, with Sean Dyche, having a full preseason with his team to put his idea, to put his stamp on it, can they play Dyche ball and keep them in the Premier League? They still have Jordan Pickford back there, who's one of the top goalkeepers in the league, who will keep them in games, who will bail them out when they're under pressure. Will that be enough for Everton to avoid relegation again? I think they're going to be in a relegation scrap again. Can they avoid it? Can they? I don't know. It's going to be close.
This roster stinks. I mean, look, when you talk about financial fair play issues, they have Like, I mean, the losses for this team over the last 3 or 4 years are like 350, 400. I mean, Mike, Mike can, I think, speak a little bit of that to the issues that Leicester had. And when you're kind of handcuffed and you're, Ashley Young, Danjuma, I like Danjuma as a good player. He's actually a pretty, he would actually be a pretty decent squad player for some of the teams that are, in Europe. But, he's going to come in and be a star. Tremidi, I don't know what they can sign. I think they're going to be really limited here. And it looks pretty bleak.
I think what could help them is if Calvert-Lewin can return to the form that saw him get an England cap, right? When he had that breakout year 2 seasons ago, he was injured. He wasn't as good last year. But if he can give them that kind of production that he had 2 years ago, that makes a big difference.
So nothing's coming through that door to help because of their financial fair play issues. What you're looking at is kind of what you got. They may bring in different bodies, but no one substantive is coming in to save this. So the question is, will the Sean Dyche ball stick? Because if it doesn't, and you got to sack him in December or January, you're going to be way adrift at that point, and I don't think there's going to be any coming back.
And let's
Sean
also
Dyche
think about
is a survivalist expert, though. So, I mean, maybe, but their hope is to survive. There's no thriving.
Here's their early schedule: home to Fulham, at Villa, home to Wolves, at Sheffield United, home to Arsenal, at Brentford, home to Luton, home to Bournemouth before they go to Liverpool in October. So they have a chance here, but like if you said to me by the end of the window they're going to go sign 3 players and they would make a difference, I think they'd be all right, but they're not. So, is this roster going to be good enough to get 15 points from those 8 or 9 matches?
And
I mean, you talk about
Wolves,
by the way. The Gladys Street End is going to be a pack of wolves if they can't get anything more than at least 1.5 out of those matches in the first 7. And let's also think about this, by the way. The financial fair play is one thing. They're building a new stadium, and so they're going to be so much in debt by the time that this season ends. They're basically going to have to start shipping players out anyways, because they're going to have to find some way to get revenue so they could get even close to the amount of players that they're spending on the wage bill. If Sean Dyche, survival is one thing. If he could just avoid embarrassment for his own CV, I think that goes a long way for him. You're talking about basically, if you want any new bodies, you're looking at academy players or free transfers at this point. And freeze, there's no one really coming off the list because pretty much everybody good's been taken. So that's why I said I'd be surprised if they're going to finish anywhere above 19th.
And you have Dwight McNeil, who is out for at least a few weeks with an ankle injury, and that's probably their best goal scorer, along with Calvert-Lewin. So, it's going to be tough. They're going to need Dyche ball to work, and that's really, I think, their only hope.
So I had them staying up, and you all have begun to talk me back. I've got Everton 17th, staying up again by the skin of its teeth. What do you guys got?
17th.
I actually have them saying 17th because I think there's a team we're going to talk about here coming up that's a little bit bleaker.
I have them 18th. I think they go down. I think every year, they just escape. At some point, it's going to bite them. I mean, you've seen that kind of happen with some of these other teams, Burnley, and you struggle. You're constantly battling to stay up and investing all this energy, and it's just at some point, it's going to go back. I'll tell you, if they don't get some points from that first 8 or 9 matches that we talked about before Liverpool on October 21st, it's going to turn nasty. It already is, and they're going to be adrift.
All right. Next up, Nottingham Forest, 16th last year. They survived after being promoted from the Championship. They had an all-out spending spree, brought in about 20 new players last year to the team.
30.
Finally, 30 new players. Finally, they kind of got it into a groove there at the end of the year and were able to get enough points to stay up. The big news at Nottingham Forest, of course, Matt Turner arriving from Arsenal, the USA #1. Go Stags! Give us some action in the Premier League. We like that. and a chance for him to what looks like be the number one there and get a chance to be a starter in the Premier League, which is obviously really good from a national team perspective as you ramp up for a Copa America next summer and a World Cup in 2026. But that said, Nottingham Forest, can they do it again and stay up?
Speaking of some poetic justice, by the way, Forest's first game this weekend, away to Arsenal.
I hope Matt Turner keeps a clean sheet in that game, and Ramsdale has a howler. That's what I'm. That's what
one
I'm.
One of those things is going to happen.
1-0 to Nottingham Forest. Turner stands on his head, and Aaron Ramsdale has a howler at his near post.
Steve Cooper will take that and say thank you very much. But in all seriousness, they did prove something last year that a lot of people thought that would never happen. The great experiment. Can you completely change one team that got you up, bring in a completely new team, and have it stick? It just stuck enough. I mean, yeah, the upwards of 30 some odd players that they transferred in first team players, a British record. I think the 20 was, I believe, just their summer session alone. And then they brought in a number of players. Obviously, Dean Henderson, a Manchester United loanee, first half of the season before he got injured. I don't think anybody in their right mind saw Keylor Navas going from France to the Midlands, and somehow he keeps them alive. But they played some good football at times. They were
really good at home. They were very good at home. They were atrocious on the road. They had one win in 19 matches on the road. They were atrocious on the road. If that happens again, I think they're in a lot of trouble.
They also stuck with Steve Cooper when they were hovering around the drop zone. They didn't make a panic sacking of the manager. They stuck with him and allowed him to continue to coach those guys, and they eventually did get it right on the year. And I think that's also, to Sean's point, that's important for clubs that are promoted, is that you have to handle your business at home, right? It's hard to win on the road in the Premier League.
I like the business that they did this offseason as well. I like Anthony Elanga. I think he's going to be an upgrade over a lot of players that they had. He's an upgrade over Ayew. He's an upgrade over Lingard for sure. Ole Anya, decent piece of business. He's someone who could play 20, 25 games in a season and be fine as a wingback. Chris Wood, he'll get you his 7 goals and be 6'4" in the middle. I like Turner. I think Turner obviously isn't better than prime Keylor Navas, but he might be better than the Keylor Navas that they got last year. Dean Henderson, I thought, was incredibly disappointing last year. I thought he kind of blew his last chance to be a number one in England. I like the Turner signing. I kind of like this team, not that much, but to have what I would term kind of an inconsequential 13th place season.
That's fair. And I think also Gibbs White was probably the biggest kind of joy of that team last year. He really improved over the course of the season. He felt like day one when he walked in, he looked like perhaps a championship plus player, like we call it in baseball, the 4A player. They're too good for AAA, but not good enough for the majors. But he looked like a Premier League player by the time the season ended, not just like a young player. He looked like someone that had spent 5 or 6 years. So I think if he can have, he had 13 goal contributions last season. If he can be pushing towards 20 goal contributions, more of those being on the assist side, keep some clean sheets in the back. The City Ground is going to earn you at least, as Sean rightly said, it's going to get you over the course of the season 8 to 10 points just on its own merit. I think they'll have enough to survive, but they're just like last year going to go right down to the end. And by the way, you're talking about sticking with Steve Cooper. He even got the dreaded public showing of support and a contract extension during the course of the season.
The next week after you get the vote of confidence.
I mean, hey, credit to the ownership group there. They took a chance, and let's see if they can do it again.
And now you have some consistency this year. You don't have 30 new transfers coming in this year. You have a couple of new guys, which will help them, and a lot of consistency. They do have at Arsenal, at United, at Chelsea, at City, 4 of this first 6 matches. So it's going to be a little bit of a rocky start, you would imagine, but they get past that. I think they'll be okay.
I got him 16th. again.
I was
staying
17.
up.
I think they'll just about stay up. They will spend. I mean, this guy will spend, but he's got to start figure out what's going on here. I think if they're struggling again, you saw what he did in the January transfer market. He will spend to keep them up. So I have more confidence in the owner of Forest over the owner of Everton, and if that's a kind of a tight battle there.
I have them 12th. I think they're pretty comfortable.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. Another team that could be really interesting as well. And they're one that they've done a lot of business and they're spending a bit of money doing it, but one in places where I don't know if they really needed that help, or one that's kind of really boosting them up the table, at least in my confidence, would be Bournemouth. Finished 15th last year. They allowed a lot of goals last year. In fact, the second worst goal difference in the Premier League with the negative 34. They did have a good run towards the back half of the season. I guess you call it that, like the third quarter of the season, to get themselves basically over the finish line. I just don't have someone on this team, especially with Jefferson Lerma going on a free to Palace. I'm struggling to see where goals are going to be coming from.
So that run you were talking about, JJ, they lost their last 4 matches, but just before that, they went on a run of 7 wins in 9 matches.
Yeah, so like that,
and that
third
kind of
into
got them out of trouble.
Yeah, third into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the guy who led them on that run, Gary O'Neill, to me, the biggest shocker of the Premier League offseason, gets sacked for a guy that finished, 12th in La Liga last year. That's the kind of move that if it goes wrong, gets you relegated. I thought it was insane to fire Gary O'Neill.
Same. Could not believe it. It was stunning.
I will say, the goal difference, they're terrible. Their goal difference was terrible, but 12 of those, 16 of those goals came in 3 matches in the first four games when Scott Parker was in charge, and absolute disaster. 9-0 to Liverpool, 3-0 to Arsenal, and 4-0 to City there. After Parker went, and they played really well in February, March, and early April. And they have some talent. It's interesting. Like you said, they're spending a little bit of money. They're bringing some players in. Justin Kluivert, big names. They're bringing some decent players in for some decent money. So they are spending, and they're spending to stay up, which is more than you can say for some of these other teams that are down there.
If you're searching by FIFA potential, you like this team. We'll see how it actually plays out on the field.
Yeah. Bournemouth is actually the third team I have going down. I have them in 18th. Bournemouth is also the third favorite for the relegation odds at plus 250. Look, and I get it. Form doesn't carry over from one year to the other because there's a big break in between. But Bournemouth lost its last 4 games, made a curious managerial decision, and like Samsel said, it's a team you might put together on the FIFA video game and it looks good, but that doesn't translate to real life. And that's why I have Bournemouth finishing 18th and going down. Anybody else?
I have them 14th, 15th. I think they're in the relegation battle for a majority of the season. It's not that I like this team. There's just some teams that I think are a little further off the pace. I think Bournemouth just kind of does enough to survive.
And once again, I would have more confidence in the Bournemouth owners going out and spending some money in January. Yeah. They're in trouble then. Everton or some of these other teams down, obviously Luton and Sheffield United. So, and maybe, if that comes into play, they're going to make another move because obviously, he's spending some money here.
Yeah, I was positive last year they were going to go down. I actually thought they were going to finish dead last season. But I think 16th is where I would put them this year. They're definitely in the relegation race. But kind of like what Mike said, there's a few teams I think that are just a little bit worse than Bournemouth.
Yeah, and I'm also watching them play last year. I mean, in the end of the season when they were playing some of these matches, they were interesting. I mean, they went for it. So I'd rather see a team that goes for it stay up than some of these teams that sit back behind the ball.
Yeah, I'm also with that kind of 15th, 16th spot. And just remember, if you talk about splash cash, Michael B. Jordan in the owner's box. So, hey, if you need to make another Creed movie just to get a few dollars in the bank to go sign a striker, go for it.
There you go. Speaking of teams with money in the bank now, that is going to take us to West Ham United. Finished 14th last year, Europa Conference League champions, which earns them a spot in the Europa League this season.
You'll never sing that. You'll never sing that.
Obviously, the big news out of West Ham over the summer: Declan Rice goes to Arsenal for 116 million. I think they finished up the Edson Alvarez deal, bringing him in from Ajax. So they spent a little bit of that, but obviously they have more cash to spend. You assume they are going to do that. David Moyes,
Please.
not a great season in the Premier League last year, but obviously had a great run through the Europa Conference League. Yes, I know it's the third tier Europa competition, but you win it, you get a trophy, and you move up to the Europa League, which again gives you a chance. If you win the Europa League, you're in the UEFA Champions League next year.
This is
Guys,
trophies.
West Ham?
When we talked about this, I think a couple years ago, Samuel, a trophy is, trophy is more important than some of this other stuff. If you have a piece of silverware at the end of the season, and it's a European trophy on top of it, it's a successful season for them. They signed, they sold Rice, but what are they going to do with that money? Hopefully, we're hoping and praying they buy Scott McTominay and Harry Maguire. It seems like
They've been linked to both.
We bollocks. You're hoping they do it.
We will be
They have been linked to both, and both of those guys are very David Moyesy kind of players, aren't they?
The statue of David Moyes outside Old Trafford. Look, I like McTominay in games. He does certain things. He's going to go there, and he's a big kind of guy. I mean, he's Declan Rice light. Obviously, he's not Declan Rice, but he does some things, and he's been, if you've watched the Scotland matches, he does some things, but whereas he's not going to play at Manchester United now because they have Casemiro and other players coming in, obviously. So Harry Maguire needs to go. I think if he goes there, maybe he can resuscitate his England career. He's been, he's atrocious on the weekend. I don't know if anyone saw the games, but they're going to spend this money and they're going to be in the Europa League. However, the Europa Conference League is one thing because, you can go in there and I think, I don't think they lost a match in that, the Premier League teams are better than any of those conferences. Now you get to the Europa League, that's a step up. There's some decent teams in that. There's some teams that got knocked out of the Champions League and the playoffs. And, there's some decent teams. So now they're going to be playing on Thursdays again. But, and if they want to win that tournament and get into the Champions League, you're going to have to take that a little bit seriously at some point. And then Sundays. So, that I think is going to be a little bit tougher to do. They did that 2 years ago and really struggled. So, we'll see what happens with them. But, if they spend the money wisely, I think they'll be all right.
There's a lot of internal strife with this team, though. There's a lot going on with David Moyes and the new sporting director, guy they just brought in from Bayer Leverkusen, Tim Steiden. There's a lot of reports that Steiden wants certain players that Moyes doesn't, uninterested in these James Ward-Prowses and these McTominays and Maguires. Like, this guy that they just brought in, he's the one who found Florian Wirtz. He's the one who developed Kai Havertz. Like, there's a lot of good young players that pass through Leverkusen that I think West Ham wants to get there, and David Moyes isn't allowing it. I think something to keep an eye on. Moyes is actually the fourth current favorite as first manager sacked at 12-1.
So you're saying Moyes
that's actually an interesting conversation there. I think Moyes is in trouble.
So you're saying Moyes wants strapping English lads, while the sporting director wants to look around the continent for maybe some more technically creative players.
I mean, it's one of those funny things that it seems like David Moyes is always on the perpetual hot seat, but yet somehow always delivers something at the end of the day. And as that little kid said, what was it, the quarterfinals, after the quarterfinals in the Conference League, airport this way, Prague is this way. And you know what? They went to Prague. Winning a trophy, as we already said, it's a big thing. The one that I would love to see for them this season is Paqueta. I need to see more out of him. He comes in with the reputation of being an absolute baller, and I thought at times we saw it, especially in the Europa Conference. But you need to see it week in, week out. Bowen obviously does his thing on a midweek or on a regular basis. I don't know. I see them. I see Moyes finishing the season first off, because again, he almost always seems to pull that out, but. I need to see kind of flashes of that pre-COVID era where they were really starting to get going. You felt like, could they have been that 7th team just outside the top 6? Shout out to Governor B, by the way, dropped a massive, massive part 2 right after they won the Conference League. What a banging little EP. I understand no one probably listened to it, but I thought it was
not
great.
a single one. No, but.
Oh, no, it's just a quick minute 15 to celebrate the Conference League title, but it's a good song.
Well, I think they survive, but I think they're going to struggle through this season. I think their season probably looks pretty similar to the way it did last year. I'm curious to see as this window goes on, who wins out. Is it McTominay, Maguire, Ward-Prowse? You know, maybe there was some concession there about Edson Alvarez, but, you know, it seems like the sporting director and the coach have 2 different ambitions. And that usually doesn't end well for someone.
I'm actually maybe higher on them than some of you guys are. I have West Ham 8th. I actually think they have a nice little bounce back season in the Premier League. That's a talented roster that they have. And I think they're going to make additions with that Declan Rice cash that they got. But again, like you guys have mentioned, that the big question is going to be, who are those additions and whether David Moyes is around to coach them. But David Moyes, outside of the run at Manchester United, which was maybe a little unfair to him having to follow Fergie, has got a good track record in the Premier League. He had a good run, great run at Everton of top 10 finishes. And I just think they will have a bounce back year in the league. I have West Ham 8th. I don't know about you guys.
I would say I think they're somewhere around the top 10. I mean, somewhere between 9th and 12th, maybe. I think
I have them 11th, right in that just kind of inconsequentially boring mid-table team.
Agreed.
I'm 14.
I think they'll make a run in the Europa League, though. I mean, that rush is, if they get some of those guys in. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to win it, because when those teams drop down from the playoffs, it's tough. But or from the Champions League. But I think they'll maybe make a quarterfinal or something like that.
I'm not saying Moyes wins the sack race per se, but I'm saying this is the best job that comes open early in the season in Europe. I think Moyes is out before Christmas.
All right. Well, to another team that has a lot of money, yet doesn't seem what they know what to do about it, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Wolves. This is a strange time right now. Really strange time, because Wolves were another one of those teams, and I think even longer standing than that little West Ham run, where they were always that 8th team, 9th team looking to take points off the top 6. Couple of manager changes later, and now all of a sudden you're wondering, do Wolves even have enough players to form a roster that could even compete at this level, just on numbers alone? Because you look at some of the guys that they have sold, and we're talking long-standing players. Ruben Neves goes to Saudi Arabia, $57 million. Connor Cody leaves. Nathan Collins with a $28 million price tag. I didn't see that one happening. Great player, but didn't see that much money for him. Raul Jimenez, who, we know the issues that came from the severe head injury that he had. It would have been almost more surprising if he had replicated the numbers that he had before the injury. But there's been some infighting going on. Julian Lopetegui just ends with the ownership, because he wants to spend money. The owners don't want to spend money. There's talk of Lopetegui leaving. It could be just the highest of ceilings and the lowest of bars for this team.
Any Futurama fans in here?
What's that?
Any Futurama fans in here?
Yeah.
Not
Well,
quite.
I'm going to take a quote from Bender. Well, they're boned. because this to me is the team I like less than Everton.
Yeah.
I think this team has got relegation written all over them. I'm sorry, Stu. I kind of trucked you there.
You're good. I didn't think anyone else had them 18th, but I have them 18th as well. I think they get relegated. I don't see where the goals are coming from. Obviously, they had those 2 really good seasons when they came back up a few years ago, but just the team is so different now. You guys mentioned Neves is gone, Jimenez is gone, Cody, Pedro Neto, Adama Traore, Rui Patricio, just all those guys that, were huge factors on those teams just like 3 years ago are now gone. And I just don't really see it. I don't know where the goals come from. And they were in that relegation race a lot last year. They had a good run towards the end, but I think this year it bites them and they go down.
I could see them honestly like surprising a lot of people early and being one of those teams that just banks a lot of points in the first half of the season, and then you just forget about them. They what was it, the mid-table relevancy? I think they could be that, like, just finish in 13th. You forget about them, and they're there. They're surviving. I think for them, it's just about survival this season. Anything above that is just gravy. They haven't been worried about a cup run in a little while now. I think it's just, can they use some money? I don't know if the ownership will allow it, but if they do use some money, get in 2 or 3 players that are just going to work like dogs in the back, get someone that could be that classic number 9 to replace what was a Jimenez from a couple seasons ago. Maybe then, and again, we're recording in late August or early September. We might be singing a completely different tune about this team. But yeah, their current roster, I think they're just above relegation because I think they're desperate enough not to go down.
Yeah, I agree with JJ that they're sort of just one of those teams where you look up and they're kind of like, they're 3 points ahead of the drop, and then you look the next week and they're 5 points, and then they come back and they're 4 points ahead of the drop. You're like, oh, Wolves, they might get sucked into it, and then they'll win a game and they'll go 7 points ahead. And you're like, now they're safe, and then they get sucked back in. At the end of the day, I have Wolves 14th. I do think they stay up. That's about where they finished last season. Anybody have Wolves going down this year?
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah.
Sean,
it's interesting.
You want to get last word on Wolves here?
First of all, if Lopetegui walks before the Manchester United game, that's like the 6th time in the last year that a manager has gone right before they played Manchester United. Is this just posturing for him to get him to spend some money? Remember, look, we're taping this August 7th. The window doesn't close for 3.5 weeks. There's still a lot of time to buy players. Wolves, could buy, sign 3 players on deadline day. I think the squad is, they don't have a lot of depth, which could be interesting, but they're not playing in Europe. I think they'll be safe, but it's going to be close. If they could get somebody in that could score goals, if Fabio Silva could actually score goals this year, I think they'll be all right.
This team scored the fewest goals in the Premier League last year, and they sold their 2 leading scorers. That's a bad combination.
Yeah, it is.
Well, as we transition to a team, and the team we want to all hear about, and one that is certainly going to have players coming in before the end of the transfer deadline, and that is the Chelsea Football Club, a club that finished 12th last year, a club in chaos, went through 4 different managers last season. Man, and they brought in Mauricio Pochettino, the former Spurs boss, last seen at PSG. JJ, I know you want to say something, so go ahead.
In our show notes, the first thing that I put under them, dumpster fire. Literally, all 5 of us are that little kid that is swinging collectively, mind you, on one swing. We're swinging, and then everything is burning behind. What has gone... And I don't even like Chelsea for that matter, but what has gone on with this club to the fact that we're talking about them in 12th? And dare I say, if the season went on for maybe 6 more weeks from last season, they would very much be in relegation territory. If they played another 6 matches, I'd be surprised if they survived.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Lampard did his best to get 2 teams relegated last year.
That's true.
That was coaching malpractice from Lampard. I think it was a catastrophic situation. I actually do think that Graham Potter was a pretty unfortunate victim of circumstances.
100%.
I think that he actually would have kind of done something with this team. Listen, Chelsea is clearly seems to be fans of what Arsenal have done over the last 5-6 years of cycle everyone out, get a bunch of young players in, and just kind of let it grow and see what happens. I like that strategy a lot more under a Graham Potter than I like it under a Mauricio Pochettino. They seem to be a team that's caught in between. They want to have their cake and they want to eat it too. Do you want to be this team that buys talented young players and lets them develop together, or do you want to be a squad that competes for Champions League this year? They're caught in between right now, which means they're not going to accomplish either.
They were a club that just bought the shiniest object in the window last year. Like they saw something and they snapped it. Remember they had to buy
Enzo.
Well, I'm blanking on his name. The winger from
Enzo
Ukraine.
Fernandez.
Modric.
Oh,
Mudryk.
Mudryk.
Mudryk from UK. Remember, Arsenal were interested in sniffing around him, and Chelsea went, nope, can't let Arsenal get him. So went in with a big bid and bought him. But here, listen to the names that have gone out here from Chelsea: Aubameyang, Pulisic, Azpilicueta, Mount, Loftus-Cheek, Havertz, Mendy, Kovacic, Koulibaly, Conte, Mount. That's a lot of players that have gone out this year. Some of the players in so far, and you know there's going to be more. Sanchez, the goalkeeper from Brighton, Axel Desais, I may have pronounced that incorrectly, but a defender from Monaco, Ugachukwu from Rennes, Gabriel coming in from Brazil, Nicholas Jackson from Villarreal, Nkunku, and Kunku from RB Leipzig. So, again, I just don't know what we're going to get with this Chelsea squad. I think Pochettino is a good manager. But Sean, I'll give you. I'll cede the floor to you in a second. But I think Pochettino is a good manager. I'm just not sure what this Chelsea team is. Like, I don't think this is a top 4 team this year. I know they have the fifth. I think they're fifth favorite to actually win the league this year. But I think that's more just on name recognition. Like, I'm not sure this is a top 4 team that Chelsea has.
They have 7 first-team goalkeepers. 7 first-team goalkeepers. Right? When you look at the squad, they have Kepa, Gabriel, Slonina, who's going to, go. I mean, these guys, it's going to be Sanchez at some point. He's going to be the guy. They have 12 defenders. They just brought in Battershield last year, and now they just signed Desazi. They have Fofana, obviously, who's out for the year. Reece James, Chilwell, Cucurella. I mean, they have all these players. They're midfield. You can't play all these guys. They got all these players. You can't play them all. You can't keep them happy. And I think part of the reason they finished 12th last year was because you just went here. And it's the same reason Nottingham Forest was slow at the beginning. You can't just throw 10 new players out on the pitch and just say, hey, go play. You have to play as a team. Right? You have to learn what each other is doing. And I think it was just slow. I think, that kind of was what happened to Potter. I think, if he took over like this year, I think he would be fine. He just, anybody that took that team over, it would have been a disaster because these guys are, playing. You got, Fernandez comes in for 120 million. He's a good player, but, it's crazy. I mean, they're spending money like crazy, and now they're starting to sell. But, they're gonna spend money. People like this Nicholas Jackson. He looked pretty good in this Premier League, and Kuku's already hurt, which is a disaster. So they're bringing in players. Gabriel's a pretty good player. I originally kind of had them like 5th. I think because there's no Europe. I think you could play the kids in the Carabao Cup. The FA Cup's not for a while, so they're gonna have. They're going to be able to rotate and stuff like this. But I don't know. I think maybe they're probably closer to like a 7th place team. But look, this team is talented. They have talent all over the pitch. It's just a matter of, if these guys are going to play together.
So that's my question: is will not having European football help Chelsea this season?
Oh yeah.
Yes, 100%. I was about to say as well that it is a great point, and there's the slightest of difference for me between what Forest did last year and what Chelsea did last year. Forest, they just brought all those guys at the beginning of the season and allowed them at least to figure it out. It just felt like every time a small hole opened up in Todd Bowley's boat, he just tried to use glue. And here's 2 players. Okay, another hole opened up. Now it's patching with 2 more players. It always felt like they brought in a new player every 2 weeks or so. Obviously that wasn't the case, but with injuries and guys coming back from the World Cup and not, it felt like it was just a completely different Chelsea team that took to the field every week. Now maybe with a off season, combining that with only just playing 1 match a week with the occasional 2 with a cup competition or a double match week, that you might get some continuity under Poch. I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was, but I think that they need to cut more off this roster, utilize some of that money to really identify the players that they want, keep Todd Bowley maybe out of some of these conversations, because that might just be the thing that helps you along, and then the train might start going in 2 years' time. Now, of course, we could be wrong because, the oodles of talent that they have, they could be Champions League right from the get-go. But I think this could be the makings of a project, but they need to accept it.
Hey, Todd Bowley wants to trade players like it's baseball. So
it's funny with all this. We're talking about all the guys they brought in and the chaos that created, but they are linked to one player that I think I actually like, and I think could be a bit of a game changer for them, and that's Michael Olise from Crystal Palace. I think you get him in there. He's a really, really a good player that has potential to be special, I think.
I was really hoping you were going to say Tyler Adams.
I don't know that. I don't know if that deal's going to happen. But they have been just throwing it out there that they have been linked to Adams from Leeds as well. Actually, I thought he had a good season for Leeds until he got hurt, and his injury I thought made a difference in Leeds getting relegated last year. If they had him, maybe they're able to stay up.
If Elise goes to Chelsea over Manchester City, then he's got. I got to question this.
Agreed.
That's fair.
Yeah. All right. So to wrap up all that, absolute chaos. All right, straw poll time. Where are we thinking? Is this a Champions League team? Is this somewhere in Europe, or they missing out again and just accept the fact that they need to keep this thing going?
I got them 7th, so not really
Europe.
Competing for Champions League, but Europa League, Conference League, just kind of there, but adrift to the top 4.
Same.
I also have them 7th.
7th as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I originally thought 5th, but I think they're a year away, maybe 6th or 7th, something like that. But I think they have a ceiling to get to 5th. I don't think they could get to the Champions League because there's teams that are better than them. But I think they could get to 5th because of the fact that they're not playing in Europe and some of those other teams like Villa and everybody else are.
If the beautiful thing of sports, if you can find continuity, then success usually comes with it. But it's funny because usually we would end a conversation with Chelsea because in previous years we'd say, okay, they're a team that's competing for the title. They're not even the top team in this portion of the show because finishing in one spot ahead of them in 11th place is that lovely team from South London, Crystal Palace. And I mean, I made a statement earlier about Wolves and that they're sort of a forgettable Premier League team. For Palace, I say that for all the good reasons because they always finish mid-table. At somewhere in the pantheons, we'll go back in time and look how many times did they finish 11th, 12th, or 13th place in this division. But what they always seem to do is they always seem to be a difference maker in the top of the table because they seem to take points off the big boys. I think there were cities thorn their side for a couple seasons, Arsenal in the past, United in the past as well. It's a tough place to play down at Selhurst Park. I think what makes this year's Palace team perhaps different from other teams is you don't have Zaha to talk about. He's gone to Galatasaray. Milivojevic, free agent. Some of that old guard that has been there to help keep them steady, they're gone. We talked about Olise. Eze, who I think a lot of people touted as potential team of the year status, he might be taken before this window is over. If you guys were talking about Elise goes, if I think he or Eze goes, I think they're in trouble of maybe testing the relegation waters.
Yeah,
I think if they lose one or both of those guys, they're in the relegation waters.
yeah, they're both. I mean, fantastic players. When Roy Hodgson came in, I mean, you're watching them under Vieira, and you just see all the talent that they had, and you're like, I don't understand. Why is it not working? Why is it not working? Why is it not working? And then Roy Hodgson comes in and just rolls the ball out and says, just go play. And these guys, Elise, I mean, they played. They have a really good attacking, front line. If they can keep, it sounds like Elise is going to go. I don't know about Eze. If they keep one of them, I think they'll be all right because they'll have a little bit of money to spend. Obviously Jefferson Lerma is a pretty decent player. I think Frank is going to be pretty good. He's very young, but he's going to be pretty good. And Hodgson will let them play. So, if they lose those two, we'll have to see who they sign. But, those are two key players towards that run at the end of the season to get them up to 11th.
Got to have faith in Roy Hodgson. Can I give you a Roy Hodgson fact?
Love it.
Did you know he took Fulham to the 2010 Europa League final?
That he did. And guess who was the front man for that team? America's own Clint Dempsey.
Clint Dempsey, yeah. Bobby Zamora. Remember Bobby Zamora?
Juventus.
They lost that final to an Atletico Madrid team with Diego Forlan in the
extra time, right?
Scored the winning goal in extra time. Yeah.
Well, Kyle, remember this is Palace, not Fulham. The good news is you get the top half with Fulham.
I always have a soft spot. I have a soft spot for Roy Hodgson, who like Sean was talking about. I think is a really good manager. I think this is the kind of team that maybe you're a little overlooked Palace, and they might be at the bottom of the table, and then Roy Hodgson goes out and he coaxes a top half finish out of them. I always have a soft spot for Hodgson. So that's why that's why I have Palace. That's why I have Palace actually 11th, which is where they finished last season.
I think the one thing too is players know you watch that team under Hodgson and the difference and the way they're allowed to play. If I'm an attacking player and I'm getting, Crystal Palace wants me or, one of these other teams, hey, look, I go to Crystal Palace, the manager's going to let me play. I'm going to be able to just, get some goals and get some assists, so I think even if they lose one of those two players, they'll find somebody that'll come in that'll want to play in that system. So I think they'll be all right. Once somewhere between like 13th and 10th.
Stu, you want the last word on this?
Jobs, I work at kind of a community station, and we have a couple people there that are saying, just find somebody to replace me so I can retire. I want to retire so bad. Roy Hodgson is begging, just find a competent coach, please. I want to retire so bad. And they just won't let this poor man go.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the problem with them might come. They are, in fact, in a relegation race. I don't think they will be, but if they are, their last 7, home against City, at Liverpool, home against West Ham, at Fulham, home against United, at Wolves, and then they close out the campaign home against Villa. Again, if they're 17th or 18th at that stage, that could be problematic for them. I think they'll finish 14th. I have them finishing 15th. I think they'll be right in that range of being above relegation, but not too much better.
Just for official sake, I have them 16th, just ahead of that Wolves and Everton pack, but not by much. But that's depending on if Eze and Olise leave. If those guys stick around, they'll be fine.
Yep,
11th place finish last year, 11th straight season in the Premier League, and I've got them finishing 11th this year. So,
yeah, it's probably
they'll play the lottery.
Yeah, they'll be right around there. One of those teams. I think they'll be safe, but they're not going to be. Once again, and when we come back on Friday, and remember, we'll be back on Friday morning with our top half preview. We're going to be talking about some of these teams that are going to be battling for the Champions League. No one's battling for the top of the league at this point. We'll get to that. But remember to subscribe on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, all at the bottom there. Leave a 5-star review. Follow us, Box to Box Football, on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now. We're on Instagram, Box to Box Football Pod. Make sure you tell all your friends about it. And, I'm really excited to be back. I know everybody here is a big fan of the game, and we're finally going to get to watch. Or I've watched so many friendlies. I got to wait till Monday for the game, but finally get to watch a real game live for the first time in a couple months. So I know everybody else is excited. Any last thoughts there, fellas?
That was a big show. Can't wait to do it again and talk about Fulham.
Yes.
And we're
Check notes. Where's Leicester? Oh.
You've already played a real game.
Hey, trophy.
Right.
KDH. And after all, Kiernan Dewsbury Hall.
On that note, we will say goodbye and thank you. We will see you. Make sure you tune in on Friday.